Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. Oh my God, look at all these faces. Man, Ryan Bramlett, Matty McButtons. That's what I call Matt Seward. Gosh, those are some good people. Well, welcome everyone to this incredible night where we get to celebrate someone who means a ton to me personally, but someone who is a bit crazy enough to plant a church and release a book in the same month. So, but Micah Davis, how are you feeling?
We're here. No, I mean, this is amazing. It's just like surreal. Like even I've had a lot of people ask me like, "How are you feeling?" And I'm just like, I'm trying my best to take it all in. You know, like it's amazing.
Well, was there a moment for you, because it drops yesterday, and you have all these moments when you write a book. It's you write it and you turn it in, and then 9 months later, it actually gets released into the wild. But a couple weeks before that, they send you a copy of the book, and you're like, oh my goodness, here it is. But was there a moment where it just hit different for you?
Yeah, that moment was not as you described it for me because I actually got this email from the publisher and they're like, "Hey, your every author is supposed to get like an author copy. It's like the first official copy that's out there in the wild." I never got mine. Instead, I got a box it was like 45 copies. So I remember Riley and I, like every day we were like looking for it, and she probably still has them on her phone. I think she started keeping like a folder because there were so many false alarms where she would like take a video of me. She's like, "This is it." And then we would open it and it was not it.
It's like toothpaste from Amazon.
Yeah, we
Thank
were
you.
like, dang,
Yeah.
another one. And so then the day that it came, it was this heavy box and it said Trailblazers on it. I was like, this has to be it. Of course, we opened it up and it's just like copies upon copies. And we're like, this is amazing. Like this is the best like author copy ever. So I don't think that's how it's supposed to go, but it was overwhelming and it was great.
Oh, that's so amazing. Well, it's a fantastic book. And, tonight we're going to do something a little different where we're going to have 6 different people come up here and just kind of read. And then that will kind of launch us into a conversation where I will get the privilege to just drill you some hard-hitting journalism questions that Matt Seward gave to me earlier. So, but I'm excited about this. And anything you want to just say before we dive into kind of hearing some chapters that you wrote or Riley wrote, and but like you wrote and I have released in the wild. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I told our church if you were here on Sunday, also, we're meeting in our nursery right now. So this is like the best nursery ever.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But if you're at the sanctuary on Sunday, I shared this with our church. This isn't a book that I've written from me to you. This is a book that I've written for us. Like this is just like a human book. It's a story that I have lived, am living, and probably will continue to live for the rest of my life. And I hope the same is for you. So tonight is just an invitation into a bit of a deeper conversation. I hope it's a safe space. I hope it's a vulnerable space. And I hope we just get to get a little bit more under the surface of some of the words that are written on these pages. And all of these faces in the room mean so much to me. And I know there's a lot of people watching online as well. And so just grateful for the opportunity to be able to share this with all of you. And the fact that you guys would show up and give up a night of your life to be here and support it just means the world to me.
Well, one of my favorite moments was as everyone was setting up. You have young people that are just kind of filling this space, and some adult leaders, maybe some art coaches or theater coaches, and they walked in and they're like, "What's going on here?" And I just overheard you talking. Oh, there's a book launch party. Oh, what's the book about? And I just got to hear you share your heart. And I watched all of these like junior high, high school age, college age students like lean in, or like, oh, I want to know about my purpose. It just was like really like beautiful in that regard. And so, well, I'm excited for you all to hear it. Micah E. Davis, we're proud of you. So, yeah, we can clap to that. Braden is going to come up and read a few. Oh, Braden. Yes, well done.
Liminal space, the space in between. At least, that's what I was told liminal space is. Theodora Blanchfield defined liminal space as being on the precipice of something new, but not quite there yet. Brilliant. My mentor used the imagery of an acrobat jumping from one bar to another. The point between the release of one bar and the grasping of the next bar, that's liminal space. The book you're about to read is a guide for living a life like no one else. In a cultural moment where we're languishing, as New York Times writer Adam Grant put it, we must ask ourselves if we're doing what God requires of us to truly discover our God given purpose. Because you have a purpose. God has uniquely equipped you, the one of a kind you, to blaze a trail, to live a life that exemplifies Jesus, the ultimate trailblazer, who himself is one of a kind. But here's the question. Are you willing to persevere through the journey it takes to get there? The character trek about to unfold typically progresses in liminal space. We see that thread all throughout Scripture, from Moses to Rahab and even to Jesus. We often remember the moment they embrace their identity as the trailblazers God has called them to be, even as we tend to forget the many dark nights, lonely times, and seasons of desert obscurity they endured to get to that point. In fact, the journey of liminal space usually plays out in a cycle. The five phases of liminal space. Liminal space often plays out in 5 key phrases. Phase 1, obscurity. The Israelites spent 40 years in the desert before inheriting the promised land. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before stepping into the spotlight of public ministry. After reading this, you might feel tempted to grasp immediately for your God-given dream. My advice? Take a breath. Know that God calls you to a long obedience in the same direction, not a cheap climb to celebrity. YouTube has numerous examples of ordinary people who pretend to be war heroes to attain the acclaim, respect, and praise actual defenders of our country deserve. We call this stolen valor. Those of us who attempt to blaze trails of significance without doing real, significant work in the shadows risk falling into that trap. Embrace obscurity. Phase 2, wrestling. Real wrestling with Jesus takes place in the desert or wilderness, where the existential questions of liminal space arise. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? When will I know? And how will I get there? I wish I could offer you potent wisdom for answering these questions. Perhaps another book for another day. But right now, I know that wrestling is a good thing. In the wrestling, we gain clear purpose from God. Phase 3, clarity. As we wrestle with God, we gain clarity. When we dig deep to the roots of difficult questions, God often meets us in our curiosity. In the desert, God told Moses to lead an exodus. In the desert, Jesus received vocational clarity on who he was and who he was not. In the desert, God shaped and formed Paul for his ministry. Phase 4, consecration. As we clarify our calling, consecration often becomes the next phase. How do we set ourselves apart? How do we cleanse and purify our hearts and souls so that we may become all of whoever God has called us to be? We meet our pursuer, Jesus, more quickly when we pursue him, instead of being content only to have him chase after us. Phase 5, breakthrough. After consecrating ourselves, we position ourselves to see breakthrough. On holy ground, Moses received an invitation to lead people from slavery to freedom. Out of holy water, Jesus received confirmation of his God-given identity. Holy hands touched Saul's face and healed his blindness. In the holy spaces of life, where cleansing occurs, we often get clearance to blaze the trail.
Thanks, Braden. You outline, real quick, what's it like to hear somebody else read your words?
Wild.
Yeah,
And
it's
he
weird.
does
That's
it.
weird.
I'm like, Braden should have done the
Yeah,
audio
yeah,
book.
Dylan.
It's like
yeah.
taking a breath,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I was like blazing
Yeah,
through
that's
it.
right.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
But
In a world.
yeah,
It's
like,
just
geez,
fantastic,
man.
boys. Well done.
Gosh.
So we talk about liminal space. You kick off the book and you talk about how it's the space in between. And then you lay out these 5 words, OWCCB, obscurity, wrestling, clarity, consecration, and breakthrough. Talk about that. Talk about that in your own life, but talk about a little bit more about those 5 phases and why it's so important for us to be able to identify where we are and how to actually do it.
Yeah, I think the life with Jesus, and I've talked about this often, that we often equate the life with Jesus with essentially just divine revelation. So we're always chasing what I call like the camp high. We're always chasing that mountaintop moment, the encounter with God. And those moments matter. And those moments are the moments that we remember. They're part of our testimony, all of those things, which are all good things. I'm not against it. The problem is we miss out on so much of the journey with Jesus if that's the only thing that we cling to, right? If our faith is only built on the mountaintop moments, there's so many other parts of the mountain that we're missing that Jesus forms us in, And so you talk about obscurity and wrestling. I think about St. John of the Cross and the dark night of the soul and the whole theology around that, about oftentimes we are formed in the desert, and you can speak to this as well. Like you literally moved yourself to the desert to experience this wrestling with God that created this space that we see Jesus go to, the eremos, as it's called in the New Testament, all the time to wrestle with Jesus. And it was in those moments that he was just as formed as on the mountaintop, right? And then, on the other side of that wrestling, there is breakthrough coming, that there are these moments of clarity that we have. And but it's a cycle, and life goes in seasons and it goes in cycles. And it's not a one-stop shop, and I think that's what I was trying to cultivate in the early pages of the book, that, hey, I'm not giving you a step 1, 2, 3 to discovering God's purpose for your life. I'm inviting you into a journey with Jesus that is hopefully from this day on.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting because I think, and you mentioned this, like with YouTube and stolen valor, which I love that line. I'm curious, how do you do obscurity well? I mean, you just started a church, a sanctuary, and you have a message of good news that you want to get out, and you wrote a great book. And yet in the sense of how do you, because I think for many of us trying to figure out how to walk obscurity and that long obedience in the same direction as you talk about, how do you do that?
Yeah, I remember I was sitting in Mark Mullen's office. Actually, we were talking about this.
Love that, man.
He's here,
Go Blue.
He's amazing. And I remember like sitting with him talking about this and just saying, I feel like God is calling me into the field. And what I was referencing there was David, like a shepherd. Like I was just like, I just feel like I'm going into the field. I feel like I'm being invited into obscurity. And so how do you do obscurity well? I really think it just comes down to obedience. Like I feel like Jesus moves us into these moments where we all, if we're being honest, there's a part of us that wants to chase fame, chase clout, chase influence, but there's a level of depth and a level of authenticity that can only be developed in the quiet place and in the hidden place. And if we miss out on those invitations from Jesus, if we're not obedient to those moments, we miss out on just a great opportunity for being formed into the image of Christ. So I really feel like it's just obedience, to be honest.
So beautiful. It's amazing is if you read the Torah in Hebrew, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. In Hebrew, it's Genesis, or in the beginning, the origin story, Exodus, the exit out. And then the third book, Numbers, is known as in the desert. So just imagine, like, if that was your third book of the Bible, it was welcoming you into the life of the desert. I think in the Western reality, it's very true for us to be like, yep, Genesis, exit out, give me the numbers, like, and I think there's something where I think many of us um, haven't known how to live well in that liminal space. And the desert, man, is such a beautiful invitation.
Yeah, can you give like a quick 30,000-foot flyover of like what that was like for you? Because for people who don't know,
Yeah.
like you were in Chicago.
Male model, and it was really great. It was
Yeah.
fantastic.
That too.
Yeah, no.
But then you move your family to
Yeah.
the desert. You
Yeah.
literally moved to Arizona, which is like, dude, there's so many desert places in the world. Why did you go to Arizona?
Yeah, no, I think part of it was when you think that you have achieved something that is a dream, and then it falls apart. And I think the natural tendency is just to go, okay, where can I achieve again? What's bigger and better, like the old game that we used to play. And I think for me, listening to some kind, wiser, older mentors, they just said, don't rush. And I felt like the Lord whispered and said, go to the desert and wait for instructions. And I was like, oh man, I just thought it was more like metaphorical. and, and then I talked to my wife, and she was like, just teared up, and she just said, I've been sensing the same thing. I want to go home. And she originally grew up in Arizona. And so we moved there in the desert. I mean, it's short for the deserted place, the forsaken spot. And just found myself waking up early, walking trails, trying to figure out obscurity, being the sense of, oh, does God hear? Does God see? Does God know? Does God feel? And there was something in, as you talk about this, but Eugene Peterson, um, all geography and topography is rooted and shapes our theology. It's kind of the essence of what he talks about. And that just really helped me understand that wrestling obscurity that you talk about. So, yeah, it was just really powerful. So, well, Angela's going to come up and she's going to read a little section. So, can you welcome Angela?
The core of a trailblazer. Character lies at the very core of the trailblazer. Without character, all other commendable traits falter and wither. Character creates an environment ripe for God to work in us and through us. From a young age, the idea of character has captivated me. Perhaps it has been fascinated you too. Character is why we love going to a movies, reading books, or watching TV. The entertainment industry bases almost all its stories around heroes and heroines who find themselves A, in difficult circumstances, B, facing adversity, or C, on a mission to fulfill, something like Joseph. The character of these heroes and heroines determines whether they succeed. Perhaps more than most heroes revealed me wanting to be the hero. At 3 years old of age, I swung, jumped from tree to tree, couch to chair. In my fruit of the loom underwear, rowing like a ape and doing my best impersonation of Tarzan. At age 8, my brother Elijah and I got swept up in a craze of spy kids and dressed as agents of three straight trick-or-treat outing. Sorry. Even through high school and college, The allure, allure and appeal of the Marvel Universe overwhelmed me as I saw myself in many of those heroes. Why? Character attracts us. Difficult circumstance either revealed the very best or exposed the very worst of who we are. Character polarizes and captivates. Merriam Webster defines character as moral excellence and firmness. James Merritt, in his illuminating work on character, says in this way: character is the impression your life leaves on others. Makes sense, doesn't it? There, there is a reason why Captain America maintained his compose when chaos breaks out around him. I leave the theater wanting to become more composed. It is why I read Joseph's story and want to be a man of integrity and faith in the face of temptation. It is why we all grew up with heroes or role models whom we strive to mirror in our words, actions, and habits. Character is the core element in the life of a trailblazer. It, it encompasses, sorry, all the other wonderful traits we will talk about. It breeds an essence of a disposition of quiet strength that attracts others and pulls them in. While a life of character is worth building, however, few seems willing to blaze that path. The jungle of life can feel intense, scary, treacherous, and downright demoralizing. But a trailblazer has such a solid character that the dangers of the jungle doesn't stand a chance. To blaze trails previously untraveled, one must possess a strength of character that will stand up and overcome all the dangers of the wilderness. Character provides the foundation of every trailblazer.
Well done. That's awesome.
Well done.
Yeah.
I gotta say, Angela's first language is not English, and I asked her to read because one, I just need to redo the audiobook, and I need her to do a chapter.
Yeah.
And two, she was nervous about it, so thank you for saying yes, and you slayed it. That was awesome. So well done.
Yes, well done. Well done. Uh, the core of a trailblazer you talk about is character.
Mhm.
Why do you think that character doesn't get the attention as gifting?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's cultural, right? We've built up this persona, talk about heroes and heroines, and often the best heroes have this mixture of character and charisma, right? Like you think about Captain America was the example I used. You think about Tony Stark, Iron Man, it's like, man, that dude had all the charisma in the world and not a lot of character, right? And he's polarizing, right? And so I think you've got people who are big fans of him and people who are like, that guy's kind of a jerk, like, um, and so yeah, I just think character is not as it's not as sexy, it's not as flashy, it's not as attractive to the untrained eye. But I think to the sages and to the people who have lived long years, way longer years than I, it's the quality that we see well up in people's lives that as they age becomes more and more attractive. It's the thing that at the end of their lives, John Mark talks a lot about. You never have met an 85-year-old who's like in the middle and just kind of like mid, you know? They're either like the best person ever or like the worst, crankiest, most cynical person ever, because it's a life of formation, of being formed either into the image of Jesus or into something else. And I just think, you know, it's not the thing that we are attracted to, but over the long haul, it becomes the thing that either defines or doesn't define our life.
It's really powerful. In one sentence, what's character to you?
Character is the integration of who I am and who I want to be.
Hmm. That's beautiful.
It's closing the gap between who I project myself as and who I actually am.
My grandfather is buried at West Point. He's a multi-star general. And when he walked onto the campus at West Point, there was a new chaplain, maybe a year or two earlier. And the chaplain wanted to kind of have this grounding, centering prayer that every soldier would memorize. It's known as the cadet's prayer. It's unbelievable. It's so powerful. Some of the lines in it is, may we live above the common level of life. May we choose the harder right. And there's this sense that, like you talked about with the formation over time, how do you begin to make decisions against yourself? Because sometimes myself wants this or wants to achieve this, but it's almost how do you begin to recognize, man, every decision has muscle memory. And if I keep making these decisions and I don't close that gap, I'm going to become something either more like Christ or more disintegrated. How do you, kind of in your own life, you know, married, amazing woman from Michigan, she has a ton of character. Dad's a Michigan fan, ton of character. But how do you like live this out? You know, because you're a feeler, you're a thinker, you're kind of, you know, but how do you go, man, like I have a guy who sits in the front row when I teach, and about 24 minutes in, he says, make it plain, Doc, make it plain. But like, how do you really embody character and choose character again and again?
Yeah. What immediately came to mind was Louis Vuitton says we become what we contemplate. And so I think before us, there's just an invitation that we have every day to decide union with God or Netflix or pornography or selfish ambition or pride or alcohol, right? It can be these, like, it's not inherently evil things. Not everything is inherently evil. Some of this stuff can be neutral. It can be not good nor bad. But we have this opportunity to dwell on what Paul calls the unseen, right? The things above, or the bill in front of me, or the, you know, struggling job that I'm in, or whatever it may be, you know. And I just think before us, we back to the mountaintop moment, like we think that life with Jesus is just these series of like encounter here, encounter there, Holy Spirit fall there, and it is that, but it's so much more than that, right? Like it's just a daily, Eugene Peterson calls it a long obedience in the same direction. And that is the opportunity we have to be able to build character day by day. It's not these like glamorous, like, yeah, here's the day when you find out, you know. It's like when you wake up, are you going into the Word or are you checking the news? Are you going for a prayer walk, or are you deciding to binge Netflix? Are you spending quality time with your wife, or are you sucking down another hour of YouTube? You know, and these are all things that are presented before me every day. I'm giving you guys real life examples. You know, it's like we have to choose day by day to become the type of person that we feel like God's called us to become.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Neil is going to come up and share our next reading.
Anything but ministry. When I entered college, I did so fully expecting that I'd enter the health industry. My parents' story, while a beautiful tale of redemption and restoration, which we'll consider later, had turned me off to the church. I distrusted pastors and clergy, cynically believing they all were hiding something. But neither did I trust people who attended church, because I had seen, heard, and witnessed firsthand the vitriol, backlash, and venom thrust upon my dad and our family for his sinful actions. I'll be the first to say that my dad's extramarital affair was wrong. I believe his actions merited just consequences, but no one can stray too far from grace of Jesus Christ. No one. Some are at church, said otherwise, and the church cast us out. Even to this day, some of those relationships remain broken. All this prompted me to have nothing to do with ministry. I described my freshman year of college as the boring prodigal son story. I, like the prodigal son of Scripture, essentially ran away from home. My newfound independence and anonymity provided me with requisite space to run from everything I knew, believed, and trusted about God. For a reason, I basically gave up on my faith. I didn't start drinking, taking drugs, or hiring prostitutes, but I did fling myself into a whole lot of animosity and aloofness. Until March 16th, 2016. For the first time in months, I felt a tug on my heart to open my Bible. After an awkward conversation with what others might have considered an invisible friend, I moseyed over to my backpack and pulled out the Bible I used for class. Health major, but still attending Bible school. Passive aggressively, I mumbled under my breath, "Speak, God." To be clear, this is not and never will be the best way to hear from God. I lacked an attitude or heart posture of openness or invitation. I'd close myself off to the presence of God. I'd simply run out of ideas. And yet, even in my stubbornness, God wanted to speak to me. Without expecting much, I initiated what I dubbed the Holy Drop. Have you heard of it? It goes like this: open your Bible, drop it on a hard surface, and see what passage opens. Do not practice it at home. Terrible, terrible strategy. Nonetheless, I did it, and lo and behold, my Bible opened to Exodus 3, the story we just read, Moses in the burning bush. About an hour later, I found myself flat on my face, weeping, pleading with God to send someone else. In that moment, I recognized that I also was in the desert. I also was in exile. I had been wallowing in my sin, shame, hurt, and pain. And that day, God called me. He reminded me of who He is, of who I am, and what He had put me on this earth to do. After delivering every excuse possible, I surrendered my life to Jesus and committed to serving Him for the rest of my days. And man, do I wish that I could sign happily ever after here and refund the rest of your money. But that's not how the journey with Christ goes. That night, I surrendered to blazing the trail. But following Jesus requires daily surrender, daily submission, year in and year out. At every turn, the life-altering question will confront us: faith or fear? Every time that I've submitted to fear less than, not fearless, faith, rather than fear-filled control, I've seen moves of God unlike anything I can describe. This book, in and of itself, provides one such piece of evidence. Do Nazarites write books? Number 6 introduces us to the Nazarite vow. Feel free to read for yourself, but basically, a Nazarite would make a vow of consecration, the act of being set apart, which included a vow of abstinence. Nazarites would abstain from touching the dead, from drinking alcohol, and from cutting their hair. In August of 2020, I came to believe, through an encouraging and prophetic conversation with a friend, that the Lord had asked me to take the message of Trailblazers further than I had ever dreamed. I felt pressed to write a book. My only problem? I had no idea how to write a book. And so, I decided to make a Nazarite vow, believing that God would fulfill His promise as I lived in submission to Him. For 17 months, I didn't cut my hair, I performed no funerals, and I didn't drink alcohol. I sensed God forming and shaping my character, growing in me a firm resolve to submit to Him, whatever the cost. At the end of that 17 months, I looked like a homeless person masquerading as a pastor. My hair had begun to grow split ends, my beard stretched far longer than my wife's taste preferred, and quite honestly, I didn't love how I looked. Almost every day, insecurity, doubt, and the threat of despair crept in. Is this really something I should be doing, God? Who am I to ever write a book? I don't know the first thing about this process. God, what if I fail? But the promise remained: what I have seen you to, I will see you through. Will you trust me? Will you trust that I am who I say I am? Living into this promise has generated more fear than perhaps anything else in my life. Writing a book forces you to bare your soul. I will have left nothing unturned in my heart by the time you get to the final page. But God continued to teach me that our job isn't to succeed, but to submit and allow Him to sustain. I'm telling the truth when I say that I didn't think this book would ever be written. Deep down, though, I held on to the belief that God would create an opportunity for me to share this story. Still, I had no idea it would turn into an actual published book. And yet, here we are. Submission to the gracious God of wonders grants us unexpected invitations to experience wonder ourselves.
Thank you, Neil. The founder of the Salvation Army says that the greatness of a man or woman's power is their measure of surrender. In that section, you talk about daily surrender and daily submission. And a sense of submission is this consent to reality. Talk about, just for you, a little bit more about why was submission and consenting to reality such a struggle for you?
Because I'm prideful and stubborn and hard-headed and want what I want and want to be in control, and want to be in charge. And I think there's something in there that perhaps everyone in this room can resonate with in some sense. And I think, as you said, consenting to reality, truth. What is truth? Truth is reality. It's this chair right in front of me, right? It's like I can either consent to that and acknowledge the chair, or I can pretend it's not there and try to walk through it. It's going to hurt, you know? But for whatever reason, we have this mindset that we are the captain of our ships. We are the maker of ourselves. And in that pride, in that selfishness, we tend to try to play God, you know? One of my favorite quotes, I say it all the time, John Ortberg, there is a God, and it is not you. And that has been the singular kind of mantra of my life, of just reminding myself that, yeah, there's a God and it's not me. I'm not in charge, and I need to surrender. I need to submit to His will, to what He's asking me to do. And, the longer it takes for me to figure that out, the more painful this process of what the Catholics call purgation, but what we Protestants call sanctification, being formed into the image of Jesus, the more painful that process is going to be.
That's so good. J.O., he has this phrase that he takes John Ortberg has this phrase where he takes
You call him J.O.? You go by J.O.?
Yeah.
They're friends,
Whatever,
so
yeah.
it's J.O. to him.
Sorry.
Mr. John
Sorry,
Ortberg to me.
Sorry. But he kind of condenses the first 3 steps in AA into a short breath prayer that says simply, I can't, God can. I think I'll let him, which is just so genius to kind of what the heart of submission really is. I can't. You come to the end of your rope. And I'm curious for you with vocational ministry, because we're all, as followers of Jesus, invited into ministry. But how did you kind of consent to the reality of this is what I want to do? I mean, obviously growing up watching your parents do this, but that you actually wanted to kind of follow and blaze your own trail. See how I did right there? That's smart.
Well done.
That's I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But talk about that, your decision to go into ministry.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned in the book, it's the last thing I wanted to do, I mean, especially going into college, I was just not in a good place, and had met Riley in the middle of that season of life, and I wanted the girl. She was going to church, so I went to church, and it was like, for the first time in my life, I was not going to church, and I was readily enjoying it, but also there was just this emptiness and this ache within my soul that was like, man, there's something more that I'm missing, And, I spend the first couple chapters of the book trying to bake into your mind that the mountaintop moments of life are not the definitive, defining moments of our walk with Jesus. They are defining moments. They are not the defining moment. And, but this encounter in my dorm room was a mountaintop moment. It was an experience, an encounter with God that I had. And I just come to the end of my rope, and I was an exercise science major at the time. I wanted to be a personal trainer for NBA players. One of my best friends plays for the Nuggets right now. I was like, I could have been doing that, And
The Joker, that's cool.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah, not that guy, but that was my plan. That was that I had it mapped out. I knew exactly what I was going to be doing. I knew exactly where I was going to go. And I just got to the end of myself, and it was like, this isn't it. Like I'm missing something. I remember reading that story with Moses in the burning bush. And if you're not familiar with it, Moses has this encounter with God, and he essentially gives God every single excuse for why he can't be the person that God has called him to be. And at the end of the day, God says, "Go, and I will be with you." And I just remember reading that and being like, what do you say to that? You know what I mean? Like that there's the command and there's the invitation, and I will be with you, and it was just this, yeah, just kind of like I'm at the end of myself, and I just sense like this, you call it a holy discontent, like this holy discontent within me that the church is not as it should be, and there are people that God needs to his mouthpiece, and what if he's calling me to do that, and there was just like every insecurity and every fear came up in the midst of that, and yet at the end of that I just sensed God saying, "Go, and I will be with you." And here we are, what, 7 years later, and we're sitting in a nursery of a church Jake and I planted, and it's like, what is going on? Like God is clearly he's doing it. You know what I mean? This isn't like, this was not a part of the 5-year plan. We just consented to reality, and this is where God's led us.
The Nazarite vow, another way to look at it is a kind of a season of preparation. It's one of the reasons people would kind of enter into that. And God's this God of props. You can look at anything and kind of see the beauty or the need for beauty. But most people don't try to make themselves for 17 months, as you described yourself. What was that prop like every morning at like month 14, looking at yourself? And I remember that long wavy hair of yours, Pantene commercial, it's like, what was that like to recognize, man, this isn't how I would want to look, but this is how I am choosing to look? Talk about that. Like, what happened on the inside of you because of that choice to do a Nazarite vow?
Yeah, I'm an Enneagram 3. I'm super image conscious and super insecure, which makes a great concoction for looking at yourself in the mirror and going, well, I look terrible, Like that was like truly, it was like every single day, it was like a reminder, physical reminder of like, I'm submitting to a process that I myself do not want to undergo. Like there were so many days. I remember I would tell Riley, I'm like, should I go get my hair cut today? And that was always like the subtle, like, you give me permission, because then I'm not making the choice. I didn't sin. You told me to do it, And every time she would just be like, no, like you made a commitment.
She's like, you're not ready yet.
Yeah, you need
not
to go
where I
prepare
want
some
you.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it was just, it was a constant reminder that, am I going to trust God, or am I going to seize the reins back of my life, And I remember the day where, so the invitation, the Nazarite vow for me, sometimes there's not an end date. Sometimes it's a for life commitment. Other times there's a designated finish line. And I felt like my designated finish line was securing a publishing deal. And I remember the day that Tyndale offered me the publishing deal, and just like almost just being overwhelmed with like, God, you said you would. I didn't believe you could, and then you did. And it was just this moment of like, I resurrender all. You know what I mean? Like if I have to, I don't want to go relive those 17 months again, but if I had to, it's worth it every single time. You know what I mean? And so you may not be growing out your hair right now or abstaining from alcohol, but you may find yourself in a season right now where it's like every day is just a grind to just like wake up, to be obedient, to do what you feel like God's calling you to do. And I would just encourage you, like, just stay the course, because God is faithful, and he comes through every single time.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Victoria's going to come up, and she is going to read a little bit from beginning to end.
May I ask the elephant in the room question? When did 5 seconds of fame become more respectable than 50 years of faithfulness? The impulse to hurry attracts us to the immediate, the glitzy, and the glamorous. But ruthlessly eliminating hurry isn't sexy. In fact, on the outside, it will make your life look boring, simple, and unimportant. But what if you forsook the world to recover your soul? I think Jesus knew what he was talking about when he talked about our souls being more valuable than worldly profit. What if a slow pace is necessary to blaze the trail God has called you to? What if, in your ruthless elimination of hurry, you capture what has eluded you all along: a life of peace, intentionality, margin, community, and love? That's the goal, isn't it? Isn't that why we blaze this trail in the first place? To find our purpose and meaning in this life? To become people of love? But as Comer states, hurry and love are incompatible. I think Elijah ran into this. Notice that after bearing the last bit of his soul to the Lord, declaring an emptiness so great that he wants to die, he fell asleep. How tired and exhausted must Elijah have felt? On the run for his life, in a position where his enemy might kill him at any moment, yet he can't even keep his eyes open. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some baked bread over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. In his kindness, the Lord offers to Elijah a type of soul rest that Elijah had avoided, eluded, believing he was better than. He took a soul rest of what I like to call bed and bread. Elijah's soul needed, more than anything hyper spiritual such as prayer, silence, scripture, or fasting, bed and bread. You have to love God, right? A God so tender and kind that in our deepest moments of depletion, he offers a nap and nutrients. Elijah wound up traveling to a mountain called Horeb, where he hid away in a cave. On that mountain, the word of the Lord came to Elijah and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah immediately fired back, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." Then it gets really good. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The story rivets me. Elijah, on the run, attempted to live out his performance-driven ministry that had carried him and his reputation so far. But then he ran out of gas. God found him in the cave and asked him, "What are you doing here?" Elijah immediately went into defense mode. And then God did a peculiar thing. He told Elijah that he would pass by. Suddenly, a great and powerful wind whipped up, a rush of wind, but God wasn't there. Could God mean that his presence wanes when we get caught up in the rush of life? Then an earthquake hit and the rocks split everywhere. How easy to get distracted by the mess created, and yet God wasn't in the earthquake. Could God mean that his presence dissipates when distraction overcomes us? Next came a fire. Did this event trigger Elijah? Did this fire remind him of a similar one he'd recently called down? Did this fire remind Elijah of the futility of living life through the lens of busyness and at the pace of hurry? Because the Lord wasn't in the fire. Eventually, Elijah heard a gentle whisper. With Elijah's soul detoxed from rush, distraction, and busyness, I think God finally felt Elijah had reached a place to have a conversation. Why? Because God asked Elijah the very same question as before, and Elijah gave him the very same answer. The difference? God responded. God gave Elijah instructions on how to finish blazing the trail the Lord had called him to travel. In his gentle whisper, the Lord commanded Elijah to anoint Elisha, the prophet who would succeed him. Elisha would carry the tradition and the message of Yahweh to the world after Elijah finished his turn. Perhaps Elijah's heart and soul had recovered to a place and a pace where God could share with him the next steps. Do you find yourself on the run right now? Maybe life feels like a rat race, the hamster wheel that never stops turning. You can't catch a breath. What if God has already extended an invitation to the life you've always dreamed of living, but instead of requiring you to do more, hustle harder, fill your calendar, you actually need to do less? In this fast paced age, to follow through with less amounts to a true act of courage. The urge to hurry will do whatever it can to convince you that more is, well, more. But the way of Jesus teaches us the more of less. When we surrender our need to gain the whole world, we recover, hold on to, and strengthen something more valuable, our soul. The life you've always wanted to live, the trail that you've been destined to blaze, lies right in front of you. Those who go furthest and fastest in life accept their limits and blaze their unique trail. The way of the world, meanwhile, tries to convince us that the 8-lane highway is the fastest and most efficient route, but the world rarely warns of traffic jams and accidents ahead. Take a deep breath, slow down, and blaze the trail God's called you to.
All done. So God responds to Elijah when he slows down. And do you think our pace is affecting our ability to kind of hear the promptings or the whispers from God, and why is that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, right? I mean, that's what the scriptures show us. Like Elijah has this all-out, kind of battle with God, where he's like, God, like, what are you doing? Where are you? And God doesn't answer, and then here's this earthquake and this rushing wind and this fire, and then the still small voice comes. And Moses says, you can go read it, the exact same thing. And then God responds the second time. And I think there's this, just this process that of slowing down that we actively avoid. Brene Brown talks often about how we live at a pace of life that allows us to avoid the truth of ourselves. And I think that's what we're after, in those moments. Like, it's like we want to do whatever we can to keep the distractions in our midst so that we don't have to face what the contemplatives call the true and false self, and to face the very worst of who we are. And I quote this in the book. Katsuke Kiyama is a Japanese theologian. He talks about in his book, 3 Mile an Hour God, that God has his speed, and it's the speed of love. And he says it's a slow speed. And his whole point, 3 Mile an Hour God, is that's the speed at which Jesus walked. And I think there's just this beautiful invitation to slow down and to walk with Jesus instead of trying to run the world ourselves.
The rabbis would often talk about how the burning bush had been burning, but Moses was too distracted. He just kept walking by it, just missed it. And God was kept trying to get his attention. I always thought that was really, really fascinating. It's like, how many days did Moses just walk by this invitation from God? Dallas Willard came and spoke at my alma mater one time, and my friend JJ would ask him questions, or ask whoever spoke at chapel a question. And Dallas was teaching at USC at the time, and he said, what's different about the freshmen that entered your class 30 years ago and the freshmen that entered this year? He's like, that's easy. The freshmen today are all distracted. So we're distracted and we're missing. How do you stay centered and grounded and rooted to continue? Because you, even in the nature of blazing trails, trailblazers, it has this sense of like new ground. It feels all of this energy of like climbing, and yet what you're offering is an entirely different kind. So talk about that.
Yeah. Rollheiser says that we are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion.
Real quick, can I just interrupt you? Where do you keep all these quotes? Like, do you have an in-ear? It's like Jake reading.
Yeah,
I see
he's
Jake
feeding
like
it to me.
just like,
Yeah.
give him Rollheiser,
Yeah. Yeah.
give him the Japanese theologian.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm like, how do you do this, man?
It's
like-
funny. It's actually how I teach on Sundays too. He's just in the back. He's like, go left. And I go left. So, no, you're right. No.
Just
and
talking about distraction,
Yeah.
and I just embodied it.
he said, but he says we are more busy than bad, And I think that's like just what an unbelievable biopsy of the human condition and the human soul. And so, yeah, the invitation isn't to climb higher, it's to dig deeper. Like that's what blazing a trail is, right? It's not, I love the word picture. I did not put this in the book. I wish I did. Probably a million people have, but just the imagery of like a tree. Actually, I think you may have done a teaching on this once of just like, is it the redwood?
Yeah.
Out in California, right? Yeah.
It's a great talk.
It was, well, clearly, I mean, I remember it. So,
Did you do that?
Yeah.
What was it about?
Yeah. But you talked about how redwoods, I don't remember it fully, but just like their root system is like extensive and it's vast and they all connect to one another. And I feel like that's what we're missing in our modern moment. Like we have a bunch of trees that are like growing and some are flourishing kind of, some are just like limping along, but we're missing a communal root system. People are just not rooted nowadays. We're so transient. We're so on to the next thing that we miss the opportunity of growing our roots deep, And so I practically what that looks like for me in terms of slowing down, it means committing to stay, and so not getting swept up in the next invitation, the next thing to go to. It looks like repetition, and just committing to do the same things over and over and over again, even if I don't incessantly feel like it's forming me in any particular way. Like oftentimes we over idealize the quiet time. Like just our modern moment, we're like the best followers of Jesus. God probably speaks to them every single day. It's like, no, the best followers of Jesus just create space day by day, right? I'm tempted to throw out another quote here, but I'm going to refrain because now I feel a little insecure.
Oh no, it's not about you. No, I'm just trying to figure out where you keep it all. Like that, you're genius. I'm insecure.
Okay. So I'm going to do it. So this is my book.
Yeah, I know, bro. Trailblazer.
Yeah. Henry Nouwen once asked Mother Teresa the key to the spiritual life, and she told him, create an hour a day of space to just pray. And I was just like, what? Like that, just create an hour a day to just pray? It was just like so simple, and yet it was like, this is Mother Teresa, you know what I mean? Like it's like, and she's just saying, show up, create space, day after day after day, accept the invitation. That's what it's about.
Boom. That's beautiful. Angela's gonna come. Actually, Aaron's going to come and he's going to read a little section. This guy came from California.
Yeah,
bro.
surprised me yesterday.
Well
Amazing.
done. Well done. Perfect hair.
A few days later, Riley and I showed up at our pastor's house for a pre-scheduled dinner. They had barely set the salad down on the table before I unleashed a monologue about our predicament. Pastor Brian, you don't understand. Our life is awesome here. We love it. I get to play basketball, go to school, hang out with friends. Riley has a pretty undemanding job with a lot of flexibility and free time to pursue her own passions. Life is great. But now we have this opportunity, and to go that route would mean uprooting our family again, giving up my last year of college basketball, the year I've worked my whole career for, giving up the pursuit of my college degree in the classroom setting, and leaving the friends and family we've gained and grown to love in this town. What am I supposed to do? I sat there at my pastor's table with what felt like the biggest crossroads of my entire life in front of me. Whatever decision we made wouldn't affect only me anymore. I now had a wife, a family to take care of. Pastor Brian, what if I make the wrong decision? What if I am prayerful and discerning and I choose to stay and I should have gone? What if I go and I should have stayed. Brian pulled out a napkin and a pen. Isn't that how Harry Potter started? I hoped whatever he was about to write would be as good. On this napkin, he drew two intersecting lines. Micah, right now you're here at a crossroads. You could go left or you could go right, but either way, so long as you're prayerful and discerning, so long as your motives are pure, so long as you pursue obedience to Jesus first, whatever decision you make will be the right one. And with some of the greatest pastoral kindness and gentleness ever spoken to me, Brian said something that changed the trajectory of my life. His words freed me to courageously step into the unknown. Micah, God is a bender, not a breaker. He's powerful enough to bend you back to the straight and narrow way of Jesus, should you choose to disobey him here. He's also powerful enough to use your good intentions, your pure motives, and your honest ambitions to change the world, even if it's not the route you were supposed to choose. The destination isn't the decision. The destination is getting to a place of unequivocal, sold out faith, trust, and obedience in Jesus that forms and shapes you into an authentic follower of him. Absolute gold. I was undone. I had to make a choice. I had to trust that God would do something great with or without my participation in either basketball or ministry. But where in my heart of hearts did I feel the Lord leading us? It comes down to your theology of God. Do you see the same kind of language from Pastor Brian that Mordecai used with Esther? Let me remind you. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you are alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? It really comes down to your theology of God. Do you believe that he is who he says he is? That he's in control, that he's good, that he has your best in mind? If you answer yes, then when he asks you to courageously blaze a trail, you must overcome your fear and push forward. If you answer no, then you'll never experience the full depth and breadth of God's goodness, power, and mercy. And you know what? Either way, it won't stop God from being God. Pay attention to the emphasized words of Mordecai. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your family's family will perish. In other words, Esther, if you don't do this, someone else will. Micah, if you don't surrender your basketball career and accept this position, someone else will. If you don't go for that promotion, someone else will. If you don't ask him or her out, someone else will. If you don't go after that degree, someone else will. You choose. Courage or fear. Fear. Inhale. Exhale. I know this may feel a tad touchy. Please hear my heart. Too often we mistake our inaction for God's absence. Just because God doesn't deliver, provide, or carry out his will on your own timeline or in the way that you think he should, doesn't mean he's not present. What if he's simply looking for someone to partner with? What if he's holding on to the hope that his glory can shine through a broken and backwards person? What if he wants you to blaze the trail? My friend, you have what it takes. You've been born for such a time as this. What ache stirs within your soul? Go after your dream. Start somewhere today, because if you don't, life is but a vapor, and before you know it, the trail God's called you to blaze will be too far in the past for you to take it and through it form a legacy. In those fork in the road moments where either option feels terrifying, choose. Choose courage. Choose to believe that the God who has seen you to this moment will also see you through it.
Thanks, Aaron. I love that piece of what your pastor Brian shared with you about God is a bender, not a breaker. And just talk for a second, because how that just like, what kind of like clarity that gave you to kind of, you even talked at the very beginning of the book, in these 5 phases, but that felt like a clarity moment that was helping you experience breakthrough of what was being kind of invited for you to step into.
Yeah, it was that moment where I realized how invitational Jesus is, that it's not this Matthew 11:28. He says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I think oftentimes we walk through life with this subtle have to with Jesus of like, oh, I have to do this because this is what God's calling me to do, or I have to go to this school because this is what God's calling me to do, whatever it is. And I just think if that's the way that we're looking at life, we're missing it. Like there's more of a freedom. I call it defensive freedom. Like Riley and I were driving through Montana back in July, and we were just like thousands upon thousands of acres and these like cattle and horses like grazing. And I was like, how do they not get lost? Like, how do the farmers keep track of them? And I just noticed there was no Wi-Fi or anything. So I'm just like, I'm locked in, and I noticed this really thin railing that's going along the highway. You can barely see it. It's not like fences here in Indiana. It's barely there, but it was this fence of freedom that kept these animals grazing, and I think that's what the will of God is. Like there's just so much more invitation and so much more creativity and so much more freedom that Jesus offers to us of like, if our motives are pure and we are chasing after the shepherd's heart, there is an invitation there to have some flexibility, and I think that conversation with Pastor Brian freed me into that of like, okay, there is not one direct way my life has to go. It's the whole cliche about who you marry, right? There is not one soulmate out there for you that if you don't marry that person. And I think God's bigger than that. He's bigger than our trivial minds try to make him.
I want to go back to the beginning part and kind of maybe just close here. Those 5 phases, obscurity and wrestling and clarity and consecration and breakthrough. I imagine for people in this room, some go to sanctuary, some, are in different spaces of their life. But we all probably in this space can relate to one of those words right now. Like, oh man, I really feel like I'm in a season of obscurity. I listened to a teach recently of Ryan's, and it just was like, oh my goodness, this sense of breakthrough. I just like, it was maybe a year ago, but like it was just really, really powerful. How do you discern in due time what season you're in of those phases?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is perspective, and so it's hard. I don't want to like play games around it and be like, well, here's step one.
Nazarite vow.
Yeah, but I think the bigger question is, where is my attention being drawn to? And I think in those moments we have the opportunity to ask, right? To seek, to knock. And I think the door is then open to us. Like we're provided with clarity of, hey, this is where I have you right now. And I think the key there is not trying to sidestep it, because we all want to be in breakthrough, right? I mean, let's be honest. Like those are fun seasons of life. And it's easy to be like, yep, this is it, God, here we go. But like, what do you do when you sense Jesus saying, this is a season of obscurity, or this is a season of wrestling? Like, what's your honest answer to that question? For me, it's like, no, it's not. Like I'll figure it out. I'll hack my way to a better life, but it's not possible, and it becomes much more painful in those moments if we grind against God rather than, I love that phrase you said of just surrendering to reality,
So good. Hey, Riley, can I invite you to come forward? Anyone who's ever created anything, you know that this is like a tag team, and you can go over there. Yeah. And this has been a big month for you as well, and just in this moment of like looking out, here's a room of people on a Tuesday night who believe in you both, who believe in this book. And I think sometimes we rush through moments. I'm so many couples who get married, they just rush through and they don't get the chance just to like see who is in the room. to kind of like, you know, create almost a reminder, an altar to just capture that moment. And just, I just love for you just to like look at the people that just gave of a Tuesday night, who believe in you and believe in this work. And I think we are all just proud of you. You know, I mean, I just, from the first time I met you guys at Northview and the little prayer circle, to just our relationship over the years, just I'm proud of not just how brilliant you are, but I'm proud more of how you are choosing to embody a message that God has put on your life and how you both are doing that. And it's remarkable to watch up close. And so can we just cheer these two on for a moment? You have someone in the sanctuary who made Trailblazer cupcakes?
Yes,
Where?
Lindsay Mosing.
Oh yeah,
Let's
oh yeah,
go.
yes.
Come on.
That's well done. That's why I'm here. But in a moment where you can get refreshments, if you have not picked up the book, or maybe you just heard a couple of just quotes, and you already ordered one on Amazon, but you're like, oh, I know someone in my life who needs to get this. I'm just even thinking for my team, I'm like, oh man, I gotta get a couple. Micah's gonna be over there. Please don't leave without just greeting these two, picking up a book. But thank you so much for coming. It really, really, I know means the world to these two. But would you offer up, like you always do when you teach, a blessing and benediction over your friends who just adore you?
Yeah, absolutely. Would you guys stand with me? And if you're comfortable, just go ahead and put your hands out like this, just to receive. And Jesus, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for this moment, and just so thankful for the faces and the people in this room and online who have taken the journey with me as we've blazed trails together. So Jesus, as we leave this place, would you allow us to chase integrity more than influence? Would we value character more than charisma? And would we seek friendship with you over fame in the world? Father God, I pray that as you clarify for each and every person in this room the trail that you've called them to blaze, I pray for a supernatural obedience and a supernatural strength to go first. That when the world says they can't, they hear you say you can. And when they hear the world say you won't, that they hear your still small voice say, I will. And I pray that we can lean back on past faithfulness, current faithfulness, for future faithfulness and what you're going to do in our lives. Jesus, your invitation is easy and light. And we surrender to you. We surrender to your reality and what you've called us to do. So Jesus, be with us. May tonight be a catalytic moment in the lives of these people. And may the message of Trailblazers go far and wide, and not because of the words that I wrote, but because of the God that you are. So Jesus, we love you and we praise you. It's in your precious and holy name that we pray. Amen. All right, my friends. Thank you.